Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, and joining me on the show from the Minnesota Star Tribune, columnist Chip Scoggins, who was in attendance at Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's press availability yesterday. And Chip, how we feeling about the Minnesota Vikings? I think it's a little bit of a strange time for followers of the team. Not that the fans are used to any other kind of thing except for strange, but to have, I think, the approval rating of the roster moves be as high as it is, but the main storylines of a press conference have nothing to do with Jonathan Allen, Javon Hargrave, Aaron Jones coming back, Byron Murphy coming back. Not what I would have expected for how that was going to go.
No, it's interesting. I mean, by all accounts, they've had one of the better free agency periods of any team, and certainly they filled a lot of holes and did a lot of great moves. But based on the press conference yesterday, is a two-topic press conference, and rightfully so, because when you are, however you want to frame it, but when you're in a courtship or conversation or filling out process, whatever you want to say, with Aaron Rodgers, that's going to get attention. And when your general manager is basically entering a lame duck year, has 1 year left on his contract, and I think most people thought it would be done fairly quickly after the end of the season, along with your head coach, and it's still not done, that's going to be a conversation piece. So I was surprised, Matthew, yesterday how much Kwesi talked about Rodgers. He didn't shut down the questions really at all. And so the more he talked, the more questions you're going to get asked about it.
Yeah, I definitely thought that. Yeah, I had expected first question about Aaron Rodgers and for Kwesi to say something like, yeah, well, we have conversations with a lot of players and I'm not going to talk about those. And instead, he went into pretty great detail, which, look, I think Kwesi Adofo-Mensah at the podium is always one of the more open general managers in the league. I don't think that he sends us on wild goose chases. And I go back to the competitive rebuild where I don't know how many GMs would have laid it out like that. And yet it was super helpful for the fans to understand like what they were doing when they're taking apart the roster and trying to rebuild it and not bringing back Kirk Cousins and all those things, because he had telegraphed what they were going to do and then executed it. I give him credit for that. And I do give him credit for being straightforward on the answers of Aaron Rodgers. At the same time, the door was not shut on Rodgers, which I think is what all of us showed up to find out, right? It was like, okay, are they going to just shut this down for good and say, hey, it's over? And the framing of the whole thing just left it open-ended.
Yeah. And a couple of thoughts on that. I mean, I think there's a segment of the fan base that thinks a lot of this is just media driven, like giving outlets something to talk about. I think Kwesi made it abundantly clear that this wasn't just some media fabrication thing that fell from the sky. I mean, he talked about his Kevin O'Connell's relationship with Rodgers and how they've had dialogue, and he he even said, yeah, it was kind of, I forgot the way he phrased it, but basically they included him in the conversation about, in their conversations as part of the process, and so he shot down any idea that this was just a made up story by the media. Any of us reporters or fans who have lived through 2009 and 2010, the summer of, I don't know if it's scars or what, or just the memories of when you have qualifiers of we're happy right now, or as it stands, or things can change. I've done enough of those through the Favre Watch of 09, 010, where it's like, oh no, this is not over, right? And I understand Kwesi's point where general managers or coaches in NFL don't work in absolutes, like, okay, 100% nothing's ever going to happen because the NFL so much can change. But the fact that, there were those qualifiers, and the fact that they're even going down, entertaining the possibility, I think is fascinating, because they set forth a plan last year. Use the highest pick you've ever used on a quarterback in the draft. Get a bridge quarterback, buy you some time, bridge quarterback plays. Then you think, the injury clouded it a little bit, but by all accounts, JJ McCarthy's going to be ready to play, and yet they're still talking to Rodgers and having those conversations as a I think a viable option, or you wouldn't be talking to him, right? And so it's just I think that's where the curiosity comes from, and the fact that this organization has already done this with Favre, having the history of kind of bringing in a Hall of Fame quarterback that's 39, 40. Rodgers is 41, going to be 42. I just think until they shut the door, how do we shut the door? you know?
Right. And it does make sense from their decision making process behind the scenes to not come out publicly and say, oh, Rodgers, we would never,
Yeah.
because, Aaron Rodgers is known to get offended by stuff. So you don't want to manipulate Rodgers if you ultimately have to use him. And there are scenarios where you could see them having to make that phone call if he doesn't join the Steelers. But from all the reporting, it seems like he doesn't have a whole lot of interest in doing that. He visited them and didn't sign with them. And now Schefter is saying, well, he might retire. And I mean, it all does feel very Favre, by the way. If he has a fake retirement, then he's gotten very, very close to the whole Favre circle. Maybe he needs that first
Yeah.
before he
If
can
if
join
he
the Vikings. But
if he starts working out with high school kids in Louisiana, then we know it's like that. That's when you're on Favre Watch for real. But yeah, do you think there's part of me that thinks he may say he's retiring, but not submit the papers and just stay in shape, and whether it's the Vikings or some other contender that needs a quarterback in a pinch, that he's available?
I think that's probably what he would do. Yeah, I think he would call for a retirement to have somebody, or put it out there maybe that he might retire, to have somebody be like, "No, Aaron, please come play for us." I think he wants to be courted in that way.
Yeah.
But I can see why from his perspective that it would be Vikings or nobody at this moment, because look at these other teams. I
Yeah.
get it. The Steelers make the playoffs, but is that offense really something that you want to go play with? Maybe with DK Metcalf there, it doesn't seem like he's that intrigued. This is the best circumstance for a quarterback in the league. I mean, or at least top five, but I think even five would be a high ranking considering they fixed the interior of the offensive line. This is a great situation. That's my
Yeah.
argument for why you should feel pretty comfortable with JJ McCarthy. Now, there's a couple different theories with that. What do they want JJ McCarthy thinking, "Hey, I better really take the full responsibility here. I better, do everything I can," or they're going to go to Rodgers? Personally, I wouldn't need him to be looking. He doesn't seem like the type of
Well,
kid
that's
that needs to be looking over his shoulder that way.
that's my point is, okay, everything we know about Jason McCarthy doesn't scream, hey, this guy needs to be motivated. Like, played at Michigan, won a national title. Um, Everything you hear about him, and in our conversations with him, after he got drafted and through OTAs and before he got hurt in training camp, did he ever project anything other than a serious guy who's very mature about what he's doing and going to attack it? So it seems a little weird that would be the motivation. Like, hey, let's not make him feel comfortable that he has to earn this. I mean, I think he's pretty self motivated as is. So you know, it, it, I understand because it's Aaron Rodgers, and but it's not Aaron Rodgers 7 years ago, and I just think you could get '09 Favre version, or you could get 2010 Favre version, and I just don't know that the upside is worth the risk of this thing blowing up in your face. You probably watched him a lot more than me, Matthew, but like, he's going to be 42 in December. What is his level of play right now? Now this is obviously, I mean, Sam Darnold had a career year because you're in a very conducive environment with coaching and personnel and all that. So it's not like you're asking anyone to be a savior at quarterback, but even so, 41 years old. And if it blows up, now you have a major problem on your hands.
I think, well, Kwesi adofo-mensah being the data guy, I also am an enjoyer of the numbers. And I think the research would tell you probably that as great as Rodgers once was, that young rookie second year quarterbacks have had a lot of success recently. I counted this up for an article the other day. 11 teams with first or second year quarterbacks have made the playoffs since 2021. So that's only the last couple of years. 2 of those are CJ Stroud. But still, I mean, you're talking about young quarterbacks have had a lot of success stepping into the NFL. And the biggest correlation was how strong was their team and their supporting cast. Even
Yeah.
Brock Purdy in year 2, a 7th round draft pick in year 2 with a great supporting cast, is in the Super Bowl, and he's one drive away from beating Patrick Mahomes. And I understand the uncertainty element of it. And this is what I want to know from you about how you read into the comments about JJ McCarthy, because, Kwesi made a quip of like, hey, I said to Kevin O'Connell, does anybody ever name their QB1? And I was like, yes. Like, I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
kind of like all the time. Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
with a
Yeah.
young quarterback like this, I think the answer is yes. He said that every bar they've asked him to reach, every checkpoint, he's passed in flying colors, which would just lead you to go, then what are we talking about? Then why are we having this press conference right now if that's the case? Because everything from where he was last year
Yeah.
pointed to this guy's arrow is shooting up to the moon, and he just needs time to develop. I think that there's a couple different factors. One is that coaches absolutely hate uncertainty. And
Yeah.
you know this, that back in the day with Culpepper, they asked Dan Marino if he wanted to come back and play. The
Yeah.
49ers, rather than playing Purdy, wanted to go with Tom Brady. Like, there's a lot of examples of this. I think they don't like uncertainty. And also, you win 13, 14 games,
That's
it
it. Yeah.
messes with people's brains, don't you think?
Well, coaches don't like uncertainty, and they're always going to err on the side of a proven thing over unproven. Like we see that time and again. Um, I think there is a expectation because of when you win that many games, and this roster is built to win right now. Like this is a high end roster in terms of and high end roster with the coaching. I think the moves they made in the trenches, which I would argue, and Kwesi said this yesterday, everything they've done on offense speaks to we're going to surround a young quarterback with as much talent as we can. So that I think that's where it's still going to end up. But I think there's that this roster is built to win right now because it's free agent, veteran driven because they haven't drafted well, so it's not got like a lot of young players that they're trying to develop still. And I think it's just the intoxication of, man, maybe we could get the old Aaron Rodgers. And if you could get that, now you're thinking Super Bowl. But I don't know that you can get that, can you? I mean, that's the whatever you want to call it, $1 million question or $25 million question, whatever he would command in salary. I just think when you have a quarterback like that's available, and you're probably thinking of Aaron Rodgers circa whatever 2018, whatever year you want to pick, that there's probably that allure of, man, what if we could tap into that and put him in this offense surrounded with JJ and now you got an interior line and we got a run game to go with. So, but I like that your argument or your data that you did with the young quarterbacks. I think we're seeing it. There used to be this perception of, well, you got a rookie quarterback, you're going to struggle for 3 years, and then you're going to take a big leap. Well, that doesn't have to be the case anymore. Like we're seeing it time and again. Like if you have good coaching and good talent, these guys can step in and contribute at a pretty high level right away. There's nothing that says you can't win with a rookie quarterback.
So I have more JJ McCarthy questions for you, but I also want you to share stories of the Favre Watch, because there were a
Oh
few
gosh.
days there. There were a few days there where I
Yeah.
was like, you know how you and Judd have joked around that some of us guys who are now the same age as you were, that like history kind of repeats itself, and the beat reporters now that are where you used to be going through the same kind of crazy stuff with this franchise. So tell us, let's gather
Yeah.
around the old fire here. Tell us some Favre Watch stories, because I thought that was about to be us.
Yeah. Well, it could be,
It still could be. You're right. It still could
if
be.
Rogers doesn't sign, it could be. But it wasn't like it was that summer. Uh, Neither Judd and I took vacation because it was literally every week. It was Favre was uh, great at manipulating the situation where, and we had Judd and I would do an Access Vikings video every day, even in the off season. And so at the end of it, they did a compilation of our snippets of our things. Honest to God, Matthew, it was like a tennis match. Not coming, he is coming. Not coming, he is coming. Not coming, he is coming. And then the last cut was helicopters swirling overhead, people rushing in. You're not going to believe this. Brett Favre is here. He's on the Vikings. But it was, I mean, it would be Ed Werder was the one who was kind of following Favre then for ESPN. It's like, oh, here's video. Favre's working out with the high school football players. The arm's feeling good. Well, maybe it is. And then, no, yeah, it's not recovering the same way. The shoulder's not recovering. So it's like, okay, it's off. And it literally felt like it was day to day. You didn't know if you woke up if Favre was going to make up his mind one way or the other. And so we got word 2 days before we went to Mankato, Favre's out. Favre's not playing. So we're like, whew. Okay, let's just cover the team. Okay, we're not covering one player. Let's just cover the team. Go down to Mankato. And even then, we're down there. There's all kinds of rumors. Favre, there was one, we just kind of laughed about it because Favre was not going to step foot in Mankato, but someone apparently spotted him driving a Camaro around Mankato. It's like, Favre's not driving at a Walmart park. He's not driving a Camaro around Mankato. So, but the last practice they had in Mankato was awful. Offense couldn't function. It was just a really bad practice. And we're on the sideline. We were saying Childress is absolutely going to lose his mind because it's like 2 weeks until the season opener. It's like he's going to have a complete meltdown in this press conference. And we get to the press conference and he's like, just like whistle, just couldn't have been in a better mood. And we're like, huh, that's weird. And sure enough, 2 days later, helicopters, Favre Watch is coming. And, I never forget, it's still one of the most surreal days of my journalism career. Like, fans are flood Winter Park. They have to get security out there and block off the road because fans are coming. And we look down there and there's a guy dressed in a chicken costume holding the sign up for some restaurant or something. He's just he was dressed like a chicken, part of the crowd. And it was like, what in the world is going on like right now? Brett Favre is becoming a Viking. Brad Childress had picked him up at the airport, leaned his car seat back so the cameras couldn't see him. They pull into Winter Park, just rush of people come like the Beatles are coming. There's a guy holding a chicken, dressed like a chicken down there holding the sign. It was like one of the most surreal days, but it was it was one of those days where days felt like weeks because you're at the whim of Favre making an announcement and you never knew when he was going to say, because, when he was in Green Bay, he'd gone back and forth for so long. It's like, I don't know if I'm going to play. Yeah, I'm going to play. I don't, he couldn't make up his mind. It's like, you just lived. It's like, gosh, because you knew he still wanted to play. And that was a great situation too. Much like this one, it was a roster. Now that roster, I would say that 09 team was still the most talented team I've ever covered. Just the number of high level players. So you knew he wanted to be part of that because he knew he'd have a shot to the Super Bowl. But it was, Matthew, it just dragged on and on and on. It's like, there's a reason why I have all this gray hair now. So I think it's because of the 09 Favre Watch.
I think if Rodgers were to sign, instead of people trying to get a glimpse and celebrating, there might be protests out front of TCO Performance Center instead. The difference is JJ McCarthy, really. Because
that's
the fans, I'm sure you felt this last year. It was a big discussion on this show. I think the fans were very hesitant to buy into what Sam Darnold was doing, in part because they didn't want it. We don't want anybody to have competition for what JJ McCarthy is supposed to represent in the future, which is finally their franchise quarterback that they almost had in Dante. They almost had in Teddy, another swing at having this true franchise quarterback to build around, not somebody else's quarterback who showed up here and the receivers made him great, and not a 40-year-old showing up and just taking one more swing. Nobody wants that. And I think that if I was thinking about this from a Wilf perspective, from the ownership, the highest level, if they wanted to soft float it out there to see what the reaction would be. I think you saw every bit of it. The fans don't want any part of this, and you saw what a press conference is going to be like every single day if Aaron Rodgers gets here, that there's not going to be any other topic. As you said, you're covering one player and not an entire franchise for that season. I think the response would be insanely different from what it was when Brett Favre showed up.
I agree, because there's just I think there's this, forget the football and how much he has left, and that, to me, that's that's the huge unknown. But I think just his personality and how how the body language on the sideline, and the things he says with Pat McAfee on his show. And but furthermore, I mean, it's Kevin O'Connell has done a masterful job of creating a locker room and a culture in that building where it's like you have a superstar receiver that doesn't think he's above anyone else. He is, but it's still kind of a tight knit. I mean, it's as close to the locker room as I can remember covering, and you would be inviting the circus to town. And whether Aaron Rodgers was on, you got the best version of him, and like it was part of that. And I think you probably would, because of Harrison Smith and Jefferson and the core of Brian O'Neill, just the core of rock solid veterans that they have. But it's right. It's like everything is going to be revolve around one guy. And so I just don't know. It would be, it seemed like it would be counter to what they've done to this point in terms of establishing the kind of locker room and culture that they want. Now, I understand, like, if you're winning, nobody gives a flip, I mean, if you're going to have a chance to win the title. But so you combine that with just the uncertainty of age and physical decline. And you're right about Jason McCarthy and the way people didn't. But, I think fans I think they loved last season and loved the Darnold story. But I think it was one of those flashpoint moment in time, like, hey, let's enjoy this while it's happening. But I think the fans are really excited about JJ McCarthy because he does represent something that's been missing from this organization forever. The young guy that can be your franchise quarterback and be here in theory for 10 years. That's what they've been trying to find, that Green Bay has found, and other organizations have found. They feel like he can be that for them.
I felt the trepidation as the season went along, though, from Vikings fans. Like, is this going to mean we're not going to see McCarthy?
Yeah.
Like, even as great as Darnold was playing, and it really shows you how unique that situation was, because there is no other example of a team winning 14 games, getting 35 touchdowns from their quarterback, and then that quarterback just leaving and the fans not being angry about it, right? I mean, that just sort of shows you, and this kind of transitions it. I'll make one more point about Favre and Rodgers, though. Favre, for especially a generation of people like myself who were 12 years old when Brett Favre is at his peak and winning MVPs, he is the most fun player in NFL history. I mean, for any of us, I'm sure, since then, people will say Mahomes in the next generation, or Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson, but for every millennial person. And so when you get in Minnesota, the most fun quarterback of all time to that point in most people's lives, it's way different from someone who has just looked miserable playing football for a long time now and has been deeply despised by the fan base. I think Vikings fans respected the heck out of Favre. I don't think that they hated him. I think that they wanted him to lose and throw key interceptions.
Yeah.
But I think they always loved those games. I think they really hated Aaron Rodgers.
They hated Favre because he won and he was great.
Right.
Like,
right.
It was almost like envy. Like, why can't we have that guy? Like, the day he was coming here, I mean, it was like that. They don't hate Brett Favre today. Like
right.
And that was, I mean, I was talking to Judd, like, in 30 years, that was my favorite team and favorite season to cover, because it was so many big personalities, and Favre was a big part of it. And that team was just great. And it's a shame that they didn't win it, because I think that team was, again, that's the most talented team I've seen or I've covered. It's a different vibe with Rodgers, and you see it. I mean, you hear, like, I'm always skeptical to say, Richard Pitino always used to say, Twitter is not real life. So we probably overinflate Twitter reactions and things like that. But it does give you a snapshot of kind of what people are thinking. And it hasn't not been overwhelmingly positive, this conversation about Rodgers being in the mix.
Oh, that's for sure. And I get, I think, a better sample of it when I do my live chats with fans because it's
Yeah.
less random bot people and more like reasonable people who show up to drop by. And I think that it is a reflection of how the fan base feels about him. Now, let's talk about expectations with JJ McCarthy because I did the look at the recent history and it was almost a 1-to-1 correlation of if a team put nothing around their quarterback, the Justin Fields and the Trevor
Yeah.
Lawrence with Urban Meyer, they failed and that quarterback looked bad. And no one could attest to this more than Sam Darnold, right? Like, hey,
Correct.
you had the worst setup and then all of a sudden had the best. I think that because of the moves they made, and Kwesi was asked about this yesterday about the age of some of the free agents they brought in. They've created a couple of year window here with a really stacked roster and a lot of guys under contract around him to give him the best chance to succeed. And I don't think there's any reason why we should lower the bar. Like I saw the initial Vegas over under is like 8.5, which is fair because there's uncertainty. But
Yeah.
if you tell people it's an 8-win season next year, I don't think that's enough. If you let Sam
No.
Darnold go out of the building, then you have to at least be in that same range. I don't expect 14, but
No.
playoff team success right away. Like I think that these things are fair to expect when they've spent all the money they've spent in free agency.
Yeah. O'Connell says this, and I think it's true. Organizations fail quarterbacks more than quarterbacks fail organizations. I think that's 100% true. And that's his way of saying, if you just throw a quarterback out there and he doesn't have the infrastructure, it's not going to work. Well, O'Connell is creating, and he's part of it because he's a really good play caller and schemer. When you combine him with the personnel that they've done, and they were intentional about, well, we're not just going to hope that Garrett Bradbury and our guards improve or get better. No, they said we need to upgrade those positions, and they spent money and they went and did it. Now you look at that offensive line and say, you know what? That's a pretty good offensive line. Like that's a good offensive. You're not going to point at that as a weakness. Obviously, you got the best receiver in football. You got other guys around him. You went out and bolstered your running back room, so it's not just all Aaron Jones. You made a trade so you can be better in short yardage and in the red zone, so it's not all on the quarterback to make plays. So they've set it up where you can put a young guy in there and feel like, you know what? We don't have to change what we do. We don't have to lower expectations. They're not going to win 14 games because you just can't. I mean, how often does that happen in the NFL or back to back? Someone asked me the other day what I would say, and I would say 10 wins, 11 wins, maybe. I think that's entirely realistic. I really do because, and oh, by the way, you gave Brian Flores more pieces to make his defense better, and that could be a top 10, top 5 defense, I think. So I just because you're turning it over to an unproven quarterback doesn't mean you have to take a step back, because this is a team built to win right now, even with the first-year quarterback.
I was looking at the numbers on this. When any quarterback, whether it's Nick Mullins or Kirk Cousins or Sam Darnold, targets Justin Jefferson, the quarterback rating of that quarterback is over 110. And when they target Jordan Addison, it's over 105. I mean,
Yeah.
those are MVP type of numbers when you just throw it to your number 1 or 2 wide receiver. And then I think a big factor here for JJ McCarthy in terms of setting him up is TJ Hawkinson coming back at 100%. They still have
Yeah.
Josh Oliver, who I thought showed a lot last year as a receiving tight end, and building that backfield up and just adding like a different vibe to the interior of the offensive line. For so long, it was like, yeah, if you're running outside zone or a screen, Garrett Bradbury is great. But man, if you got to go toe to toe with some heavyweight, he's going to get beat. And it's only one press conference. It's only one, actually just a Zoom call with Ryan Kelly. But when we spent
They've added nasty.
Yes, right. You spent 15 minutes with Ryan Kelly and you're like, you know what? He seems pretty nice, but he also seems like he could not be nice, right?
Yeah.
He's got that vibe.
I don't know anyone ever matched Steve Hutchinson in terms of that I've covered. I mean, Steve Hutchinson would eat your arm for breakfast. I mean, he had nasty to him. Like a great guy now, you talk to him, but like in football, he was just mean, nasty dude. I feel like they brought that into their locker room with these two linemen.
Mhm.
Probably great guys. I don't know. I've never met them, but I think just from the reputation, what you hear that they're not going to get pushed around, and they're going to bring a kind of an edge to them. And so, and that's the thing is like you hear quarterbacks talk about all the time, like just don't get the pressure up the gut in their face. Like that's everybody gets uncomfortable when that happens, right? So I just think they've the infrastructure they've created so that McCarthy can really feel comfortable and thrive. It's there, and then you have a coach who spends more time and invests more thought and all these things into that position than probably any coach I've ever encountered. Because like that is his experiment, his science experiment. I I'm saying all this, and I'm like, well, why are we talking about Rodgers?
Right. I feel the same way. I
Like,
feel the same
why are
way.
we talking about this? I don't understand it, Matthew.
Because because of a knee. I mean, honestly, because of a knee. And it's a long recovery to that injury. That injury is also a little bit more tricky. And this is coming from a surgeon that I interviewed on the show not
Yeah,
that long ago. But it's a little more tricky than an ACL, and it can have more issues that go along with it. We certainly saw that from Sharif Floyd. Now, that's not problematic as of this moment in the same way, but that's just my understanding. And if you're them, and you win 14 games and you know the expectation is high, you also saw what happened the last time you did not have a backup quarterback ready.
true,
And
true.
you went from being a team that was probably going to make the playoffs to a team that missed the playoffs. This is why they need to get Carson Wentz or whoever who could keep
Yeah,
winning. But I
Flacco,
think that
Flacco, or
there
something.
there just exists that fear. And the other thing is too, this is what I want to ask you, Chip, because you've covered a lot of quarterbacks. I have as well, about your opinion on what makes a success or failure, because I totally agree that supporting cast and coaching and all that stuff, but it's not everything.
No, you
And
got to. No, it's not everything. And I covered McCarthy in college. Just they played the Gophers here, and I'll say the one thing that's jumped out to me that night because they didn't really throw the ball that much. The way he moved, not just scrambled, but moved around, he was a lot better at that than I guess I knew. Like that was really impressive how he moved.
he had that touchdown in the corner where he outran
Yeah,
them to the edge. Yeah.
yeah. Like this, it's like man, he's a good athlete. But beyond that, just our conversations with him, and this doesn't guarantee success. I think it does play a part though. He has that it about him. He has that uh, kind of that personality or that aura or whatever, where you just think, man, this kid's mature. He gets it. He has the confidence. Um, Kind of sees things clearly, not just on the field, but just kind of in talking to him. He just kind of has a presence about him. And then we saw, like when we saw him in training camp, particularly as training camp went on, you're like, man, he's getting better. Like first week of training camp, we saw some balls hit the ground, probably nerves, probably head spin a little bit. But as they got going, it's like his willingness to try to squeeze balls into tight windows, um, make throw. The deep ball was there. I just, he obviously had the arm ability that or the arm talent, the kind of cliche that they talked about. But I just think he has kind of a presence that you can tell he came from a top 10 college program, top 5 blue blood, that there's a pressure and spotlight on those guys, and he's lived it. And so it doesn't seem too big for him.
Yeah, I made a tongue-in-cheek comment on a radio show that ended up being one of those videos that everyone dunks on you for or whatever. But I said that last year in camp, like I thought we were told that we were getting Matt Hasselback, but he looks more like John Elway. And the, of
Yeah.
course, of course, I don't think
Yeah.
he's going to be John
Yeah.
Elway. Come on, everyone knows that.
Yeah.
But what I mean is, when we were watching him practice, exactly what you're talking about is
Yeah.
that there is a playmaking element to him that I think his natural thing that happens, like how sorry, Kirk Cousins' natural thing when something goes down in front of him, when the bleep hits the fan, is to check it down to TJ Hawkinson. I think for
Yeah.
JJ, it's go make a play. And
Yeah.
we saw that in college from him. We saw that in camp from him. And I also think that the arm talent was a lot higher than it was made out to seem. I mean, in his college tape, people talk about, well, he can't really drive the ball down the field. But then we saw him doing it because he's
Yeah.
working with Josh McCown and Kevin O'Connell every day. And it's not that he's not strong enough to do it. He's very physically strong. It was probably just technique wise and then
Yeah.
learning and learning and learning. I think his willingness to learn, his maturity with a mic in front of him is incredibly impressive. You saw it again
Yeah.
with the interview he did the other day, but that's always going to be it. And that is why you keep going back to, like, I agree with what Kwesi said. For me, from the outside, he's checked every box. So again, why are we talking about anybody else? And I think it just circles back to kind of that fear of the unknown. But I also believe from what we saw that he's not a rookie. He has been through an NFL season and seen how it all works. He knows an NFL playbook. He knows an NFL training camp. He has been on the field with the Vikings first team defense going against his second team offense. This isn't someone who's stepping into it for the first time. And
Yeah.
I think he should hit the ground running. If that happens for them, then to me, Chip, they are in the best position that they have been since, I want to say, Favre and the helicopters. Is that, I mean, maybe going to Philadelphia for the NFC Championship, of course, like
Yeah.
for a
Yeah.
chance to go to the Super Bowl there. But aside from that, like as a franchise, as an overall, like where do you stand within the National Football League?
Yeah.
Probably the best, or maybe the day that Kirk signs and we think that's going to get them to the Super Bowl. Like there's very few moments that I could say will be better than when JJ McCarthy takes the field as QB1 for training camp.
Yeah. I felt, when they got to the NFC Championship game the year before Kirk, like all that crew, the Barr, Kendrick, Smith, all those guys were in their prime. They hadn't reached the end of it yet. And so you feel like, man, their window is right now. It's the same thing, right? I didn't think that team was as good as 09, obviously, but they were a team that was built to win right then. And I think the window, it's weird now. I think their window, because of the veterans they have now, I'd feel more comfortable if they had drafted better and some of these guys were 26, 27, 28 versus 29, 30, 31. That's where at some point the draft misses will catch up to you. You can keep doing the free agent thing, but you stay old, so it's a little bit tricky there of figuring out when guys hit the end versus, you know what I'm saying? But they're in a good spot because as a snapshot where they are today, I like this roster a lot. Going into at the end of the year, I didn't like it so much because I felt like there's real deficiencies on both lines, and we saw in the playoffs that you can't be deficient on either line and think that you're going to really be a true contender. Like, they got better in free agency on paper. I mean, they just did, and so that's why I think in a lot of I think the equity that O'Connell has in terms of quarterback play. I don't know if it's as easy as say you can put anybody in there and they're going to thrive because Kevin O'Connell. That's probably simplistic, but I think he knows how to navigate weaknesses and pull out the strengths of his quarterbacks and gear things around that really, really well. And I think he would do that with McCarthy for sure in year one.
I think you could already see those two gelling early last year, and then they spent each week together meeting. I mean, how about this? He's coaching a 14-win team, but still having a weekly meeting with JJ McCarthy to prepare him. It just sort of shows you this was always the plan of where they were going to go. And maybe if Sam Darnold had made the NFC Championship, we'd be talking about a franchise tag for him and a little different story. But the way it went for Darnold ends up changing history and leaving them where they expected to be, or I guess resetting history and where they expect it to be. One more thing for you, Chip. So you asked Kwesi adofo-mensah about his contract situation. I think he maybe misunderstood exactly where you were going with that yesterday.
Yeah.
But I think what you were trying to get at with him, and maybe he doesn't realize this, is that a general manager without a contract extension operating the draft is something you basically never see. That you don't ever see a lame duck. I mean, only in bad situations like the New York Giants, not 14-win teams who are who just spent,
Yeah.
whatever $1 million in free agency. I tend to want to lean toward just that this will get worked out, Chip. But how are you reading the situation with O'Connell getting his deal done basically immediately and then us
Yeah.
sitting here and waiting on the other one?
Yeah. My reporter instincts say something's going on because it's, if you just looked at results since he's been there, team's winning, right? They've won a lot of games. Like, you would think it would get done pretty easily and pretty quickly in the same way that O'Connell did. Now, obviously, the draft resume is not where it needs to be, right? So that could be a holdup. Term could be a holdup. And yeah, I think Kwesi misread or not misunderstood, but it's general managers have to do the long play, and they're trying to build for the future, and it's just unusual to have a general manager that's making all these. What was the number that they spent in free agency? 300 million, right? Commitments, and do a draft where he's down to the last year, and there's no resolution, and it just feels off to me, right? Like, and maybe it's just the reporter skepticism in me. I just thought it'd be done a lot quicker than it is, and the fact that it's not done now makes me think, like, what's going on here? Like, you think there's some urgency to get this done, right?
Well, you and Zolgad went through so much with this franchise that if your default is to always go to something's going on there, well,
I know.
it was during your time. My default recently, since this group took over, has been nothing's going on there, which has been
Yeah,
mostly true in the Jefferson thing and the O'Connell. Is O'Connell going to get traded? Is like, no.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That
So
made no sense. That made no sense to me at all. Yeah,
zero, but
yeah,
also might have made sense from an agent trying to pressure the
yeah,
team a
yeah.
little bit. Bad idea from his agent. But anyway, that's a different story. So I've been more of the mind of like, well, let's see. And I remember saying, well, if we get to the combine and it doesn't, I'll raise an eyebrow. So then I had one eyebrow up. And then if we
Yeah,
get to the draft and there's not, then it's like full, both eyebrows, like what's going on here?
yeah,
Because then it gets a little bit strange if you're
yeah.
operating the entire draft and you still don't have an extension. Then we get into a land of, is he just like not going to be the GM in the future? Like, is this going
I
to
know.
happen? Or like, what is going on here? Is he going to start doing the George Costanza and pulling the trophy behind his car and everything? And like, what is going on? So then I think it gets suspicious later, but there's two things that stuck out to me. One, he said it was the busiest time of the year, and my gosh, they were busy. But he
Yeah,
also did note, if I caught this correctly, that like an agent had asked him the same thing. Like, so
yeah,
like, what's your deal kind of thing. I think there's a lot of people probably in that world who want to know like what is going on with that franchise. Cause it
yeah.
seems like the A+ franchise of the league. Why wouldn't one of its key leaders be all set? So
Well,
I tend to stand on both sides of that fence.
yeah, and things typically get worked out. They do. We typically it's player contracts. Like, oh my God, they're going to hold out, and then they they get it done. But uh, it would be one thing if this was a losing organization, and you're like, okay, they're going to keep him. Is this what's going on here? I mean, this is an organization that's had a lot of success, won a lot of games. They haven't, obviously done anything in the playoffs, but uh, I just thought it would be pretty seamless, and the fact that O'Connell's was and Kwesi's clearly hasn't been, and I understand they're busy, but so busy that you can't get a cut. I mean, it just seems, again, my antennas go up high whenever there's you're wondering, like, what's going on behind the scenes. Well, my antennas go up. So, but uh, clearly doesn't seem to be a bothering him, at least publicly. Kwesi, he handled it pretty well. He said he doesn't wake up thinking about it every day. So maybe that's his uh, untraditional football background, that he didn't, grow up. He's not a football lifer, right? So maybe um, it doesn't register in the same way it would someone else. Like, oh my gosh, we have to get this thing solved like yesterday. I don't know, but I do think it's a little unusual that it's gotten this far without being done.
Okay. Well, just a real quick, as one of the things when I first moved to Minnesota and worked with our great friend Judd Zolgad, he
Hmm.
told me about like instincts on the beat. He said, if it looks like it's unusual, something's probably going on, which served me really well from years
Yeah.
2016 until
Yeah.
2021, and a little less so in recent years. So before I let you go, Chip, the Vikings don't yet have a backup. I just want you to name a random Vikings backup and talk about them from your time covering the team. It doesn't matter who, doesn't matter when, what era. Just give me a random back because I don't care. I don't care about
So
this.
we were at training camp in Mankato, and we stayed away from a little bit farther out from the campus. We were out by the highway, and Judd and I would always go to the Applebee's across the street there after get done right, and we go over there, have a couple beers and dinner, and no players ever came out there, right? Because it's they stayed close to where they were, and we're out there one day, and in comes John David Booty. We're like, John David Booty's gonna be my favorite, my favorite quarter. But he looked at us, he's like, "Oh, are you kidding me? Like, I have to come here and see report." John David Booty. We thought John David was gonna be he was the guy. What did they draft John David at? He was
It must have been '08, somewhere in that range.
yeah, I think it
Some
was our first year. Yeah, it probably was '08. And he was USC, correct?
That was right. And they had that run of great USC quarterbacks.
Yeah.
Not all of them worked out in the NFL, but we didn't
So
know that yet.
did John David start at Louisiana and then went to USC? Was
That
that how
might
it
have been it.
was? I can't
Might have
remember.
been.
It's been so long, but yeah, John David Booty. I remember thinking uh, he probably just hated seeing Judd and I when he walked in there because he thought he was going to have some peace and quiet from training camp.
All I would suggest is people who like old games, go watch a few of Gus Frerotte playing with Randy Moss. So
Gus,
much fun.
yeah,
So much fun. Gus just threw it up for him. Just go
I
get it,
loved
Randy.
covering. Gus was a fun guy to cover. He was a fun guy to cover. That was an interesting time because I mean, was it Gus and Ponder and who else was in that? It was a weird. That whole time was kind of a blur, but Gus was a fun guy to because he was a veteran, been around. He just he had a great perspective on things. So fun guy.
Chip Scoggins, Minnesota Star Tribune, the best. And I'm glad we could do this, man. I mean, it's been
Yeah,
a little
thanks for having me. This is
while.
fun.
You
Yeah,
hadn't seen the new studio look
I
and
love it. Yeah,
everything.
this
It's
is
like
this is high tech. This is good stuff.
this
You
is
got
the
the pennants
YouTube
back there. I
investment
love it.
here. We're
Yeah.
modern. We don't have a
Well,
TikTok yet.
well,
Uh,
you're doing great stuff, man. So it's always fun to come on with you.
I appreciate it. Appreciate the time and the fun trip down memory lane a little bit there as well. So thanks for your time, and
Yep.
we'll catch everybody later.